Hey, I wanted to put together a quick video just to show you a couple of the things I've been thinking about in terms of crop sensor bodies versus full frame bodies, specifically with noise and how they handle noise. What I tried to do was create equal footing in terms of focal length. So I took a D500, I paired that with a 400 millimeter 2.8 FL, and then I took the D4S and use the same lens with a teleconverter. Now that doesn't give you the exact same uh, dimensions, but it comes pretty close. It comes within about 10%. And then I scaled the two images to be identical. So these were taken indoors. I wanted to get a little bit of a challenge with light. I took two images and I'll show you these, how they look. Right out of camera, no adjustments. So this is what happens right out of camera with the 500 at 2.8. ISO 1600. And the challenge was really to see what combination performs better. Does a crop sensor perform better at a lower f-stop versus a full frame, in this case the D4S, with a teleconverter losing a stop of light and therefore increasing the ISO. We went from, in this example, 1600 to 3200. So does the full frame body handle that noise better and make it worth the time? So the first thing I just want to do is toggle back and forth. I'll show you the two images out of camera. The thing I noticed right away is this is the D4S, and you'll see a cooler white balance. Both were set to auto, so the camera chose, and in every example, the D4S chose a slightly cooler white balance than the D500. Again, both set to auto white balance. I didn't make any adjustments or recommendations to the camera. So these were scaled. I actually had to scale up the D4S image slightly so that they would match, and then the layers were aligned. Now, because one is shot at 2.8 and this one shot at f4, the depth of field is going to be a little different. So this will have, the f4 is going to show a little bit more detail around the edges. But what I wanted to do is focus first on the middle of the camera where the focus point was, and show you how, when we zoom in, how that compared in terms of detail. Now the focus was slightly off with both bodies. So this is the D500, and depending on where I go on the image, it's a little bit different, but if I stay in the middle, it's kind of the common point for focus. That is the D4S. You can see some nice detail in here versus the D500, which was a little softer. Now again, if I move to different parts of this image, if I go up here, you'll see the D500 does bring in some better detail here, and the D4S is actually a little softer. So it depends. It must have just been a hair different in terms of the focus. This is the D500. That's the D4S, a little bit closer in this part. So again, when you look at one part of the picture, the D4S looks sharper. If you look at a different part, the D500 looks sharper. When I took the sharpest areas, I think I would say that this is the D4S. I would think the D4S was a little bit sharper in these edge areas, and then some of the detail. There's like a fine pattern that's on the ceramic itself. Plus, you get to see all the grease and stuff from my kitchen. All right. So that was part one, is to compare which is sharper, the D4S with the teleconverter or the D500 with the 400 2.8 naked. Pretty close in terms of which was sharper, maybe a slight edge to the D4S. The other thing that you have to consider is when you put the teleconverter on, you do lose that stop of light, but you also gain a little bit in terms of the depth of field. So if you're looking for a shallow depth of field, the 500 2.8 has an advantage. If you're looking to get more of the subject in focus, the D4S would have an advantage. I intentionally set this up as a low light comparison. So my goal was to show how these two would look in lower light, and that's where I would be using, potentially using the D4S. Now, the big question is, how does it handle noise? So you lose a stop of light, but the full frame D4S, does it handle the noise better or worse? So here we're looking right now at the D4S, and I'm going to show you how that compares to the 500. So here's the 500. If you want to look in this area right here, zoom in a little bit, D4S, D500, D4S, D500. I would say that the noise performance, even a stop less of light, is slightly better on the D4S. Certainly at equal ISOs, the D4S would outperform this one pretty easily. So even losing that stop of light, I was surprised that the amount of noise was greater in the 500. So when thinking about this, what are the options in low light? I think I would be inclined to go with a D4S at 560 millimeters and lose that stop of light with the teleconverter, as opposed to the D500 at 2.8, where I would pick up the stop of light. Very similar. Honestly, I think either setup works very well. The other thing to consider is that when that D4S is in low light situations where you don't need the teleconverter, a larger subject, or you want to go with something that's a little bit more environmental with the full frame, you would certainly have the advantage of better noise performance. So just a quick comparison. If you have any thoughts, let me know, and thanks for listening.